Mia Certic so long.
Hello, everybody. Hi, how's everybody doing today? I'm glad to hear that. My name is Darren St. George. I'm the director of the Southold Historical Museum. I'm just curious how many have visited us before for another lecture, maybe earlier in the season? Okay, wonderful. And how are you hearing about us? Is this email? Is this by, are you being coerced into coming? What's happening? Email? Email? Website, okay, online. All right, good to know. Well, thank you so much for coming out. I always want to thank our board, our staff, and our incredible group of volunteers who make these programs possible. We're also thrilled to have Mia Certic with us today from the Montauk Historical Society and Lighthouse. She's the executive director. We have a great program for you. If you're not aware, we also have a line dancing event happening tomorrow night right next door, right here. If you want to come check it out in the barn, we're going to be doing that through the month of May with a party on the 23rd. But there are lots of events for you to get involved in. Last time we had a lecture here, we had a question about our projector. Can everybody see the screen today? We tried to raise it up a little bit, make it a little bit more convenient. Until we get a donation for a new TV and station in the room, we're making do. But if anybody has any requests or wants to make a donation, we're happy to accept it. Speaking of which, we're also accepting anybody who wants to sign up for a volunteer. If you haven't volunteered with us before, we're happy to bring you on in any capacity on any day that you're interested. You can sign up. We have some papers right to the left, as well as some books for sale after the program and snacks. That's enough from me. Let's get to the program. I'm going to start with a movie. What should I say? Any introduction for the film?
Yeah, just a quick introduction. Hi, everybody. I'll stand.
Okay, go ahead. I'll trade you. Mia, everybody.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me here, Darren. I'm so excited to be in Southold. It's a fantastic history museum. It's wonderful. I work at the Montauk Historical Society, and I've been there since 2020. 2021 was the 70th anniversary of the Pelican. And I happen to know that because I read the book Dark Noon. I think it was the way most people who don't have a personal connection to the Pelican know about it, because there was a book by Tom Clavin called Dark Noon, came out in the beginning of the, I think it was 2005 or something. And so we would give little talks at the lighthouse occasionally, book talks and so on. And I said, maybe we should do something about the Pelican. And the board said, okay, see who comes, see if anybody shows up. And we had standing room only. We were shocked by the number of people who came. And so that is the genesis of this and of this film. We met a few people. We met a few people who were relations of people who were lost. And because my husband and I have, before I had this new career in the Historical Society, we did documentaries together for many years. And so it was sort of a natural thing for us to do, to say, these are great stories, let's try to capture them. So we did a little 15-minute video, and it was sort of to serve as a pilot to see what the interest was and whether we felt and other people felt that it was worth creating a feature-length documentary, which we are now nearly finished with. So we did this, and this really sort of tells pretty much the story of the Pelican. If you know it, it'll be familiar. If you don't know it, it'll be, I hope, informative. And then after it's over, we can talk about it. Yes?
I have a question. When the feature film is done, will you bring it back here to show all of us?
Sure thing.
Okay, good.
Do you have anything to do with Pelican personally? I know you do. So this was the film that we put together the first year, and what has happened since then is that we've met more and more people who have had a connection to the Pelican. Quite a few whose names were mentioned there, and we realized that because of the nature of this accident, we had a group of people. We had 45 people died. Probably the worst accident in non-commercial fishing ever during peacetime. Anyway, but they were not a group. It wasn't a church group or a club or a school or anything like that. These were people who just came. What they had in common was They had Labor Day weekend off. They wanted to go fishing. There was this great deal where it's $3 for the trip on the train. The train even had a car with ice in it so that you could pack your fish in ice for the way back. And there were these boats in Montauk, and as they said, and we learned even more about it, you had to run onto those boats because there was a limited number of boats and there were more people than boats at the especially on a holiday. So what happened afterwards was there was no group. There was no way for people to come together and mourn. And there was never a memorial. For what happened in Montauk was that 3 or 4 days after the accident, the Coast Guard held an inquest. I mean, it was almost unbelievable speed that they did that with. And they very quickly decided that it was all the fault of the captain. The captain was responsible for negligence. The captain, by the way, died saving people. But they wanted to close that case. And the captain, the only possessions he had were his boat, which he lost, and the engagement ring that he had bought for his girlfriend, which he drowned with and was never recovered. So there was no money that anybody could have, and there was sort of talk about a lawsuit. There was they considered trying to sue the guy who owned Fish Shangri-La, George Goebel. That he was somehow responsible for encouraging captains to put too many people on the boats, but it really didn't come to anything. Once the captain was blamed, it was kind of all right, fine, we're not going to do this. And consequently, we've had two communities that have been not two communities. Let me say two factions who were mourning in their own way. Montauk suffered a lot financially. The fishing industry, that kind of the headboat industry, went under for a little while. As Tom was saying, captains were having a hard time, putting food on the table. And the mourners were on their own, right? And trying to piece things together. In particular, the people whose families' remains were never found. There were, I believe it was 18 families, 18 members of the party that day who were never found. They just dealt with it in their own way. And I think we have a tendency, I guess it's sort of human nature, when there was a disaster, right? We want to know what led up to it. And then it's done. And we don't really pay attention to what happens, how that affects the people who are involved, and not just the people who are directly involved and their families, but the next generation and their friends and their communities and their workplaces. I mean, this was huge. This was a huge thing. These were 45 people who came from the sort of tri-state area, mostly from New York, some from New Jersey. You just sort of imagine how that multiplies out. It was a huge number. So we thought, well, maybe it would be nice to have a memorial. So we started working on that, and we found that people were very much interested. People in Montauk were interested, and obviously the families that we found were interested. And little by little, we started finding more and more people, as I said. And last year, we dedicated a memorial at the lighthouse to the Pelican. It is a beautiful, beautiful glass monument with the Pelican etched on it, so that when you stand at the lighthouse over where the Pelican went down, which was a mile off the lighthouse, it's as if it's still floating in the water. And underneath are all the names of people. And immediately, the day that we dedicated it, people started doing rubbings of the names. And we've had a lot of comments that we never had anywhere to mourn. We never had anywhere to grieve. And now we have a place, and now we have a monument, particularly the people who didn't have funerals, who couldn't have funerals for their family members. So we were working on this expanded documentary, and then about 3 weeks ago, email from Tom Clavin, who you saw here, who wrote the book, introducing me to someone who had written to him and her name is Noreen Moore. Her brother was the little boy who disappeared on the boat. He was 14 years old, John Furness. And Noreen read Dark Noon. She found somebody gave it to her to read, so well after it was published. And she saw a reference that his skull had been found in 1960. And she said, well, I didn't know anything about this. I don't think my parents ever knew anything about this. And so she wrote to Tom. Tom really couldn't help her. She persevered. And the last time she wrote to him, he said, you know what, they're doing a lot of research at Montauk Historical, so I'm introducing you to Mia, see what you can do. And so we did get in touch with the Suffolk County Medical Examiner's Office, and we had a little bit of a false hope given to us. We thought that they had actually found the skull. Initially, they were, stonewalling, but they did find a piece of bone that they think might be her brother. She's done DNA tests, and she just wants that. And that to her, it's kind of gruesome, but it's a sense of closure. She wants to bring him home, she said. And so, this has been an extremely it's been extremely emotional for all of us. But I think that ultimately we're going to feel good about it. And I know that the people who came to the dedication last year included somebody who was 11 years old at the time when his father went out. He was supposed to be on that trip. He overslept. He didn't get on the trip. We had someone else who was 9 years old when his father died, and he just always believed that his father would come back, that they would find him because he was missing. Surely he has amnesia, and he's somewhere, and he'll come back. And Noreen said exactly the same thing. Her mother was convinced that her brother would, it's hard to accept that kind of death. We're still working. We're doing final edits now to be able to get our deadline for the submission to a film festival. And we've had to rethink it because of Noreen's contribution. But we've decided, we will probably keep finding more and more people, but ultimately you have to stop somewhere. And a lot of the people who are involved, some whom you've seen here, are getting really old. And we want to make sure that this is done and they can see it. We want them all to be able to see it. So I'm happy to answer any questions. So this is it's an interesting question. What we found, we went back into the newspapers. We have a fantastic historian, and she did great research. And we found the article in Newsday that said that a skull had been found, and it was believed to be a juvenile skull. And it was found at 3 Mile Harbor in East Hampton, logical place. And they said it's one of two people. It's either a young woman who was murdered in Boston, who her body parts had been washing up. She was, yeah, and or it was John Furness. And when I read that the skull was found, I just assumed, and I think most people who read the book assumed, well, this must have been returned to the family. The last article that we could find about it said that they were waiting for confirmation of the skull. And when Noreen found out about this, and she hadn't known about a skull, she was starting to think that maybe Tom Clavin had made the whole thing up. She couldn't. And then her sister-in-law said to her, "Oh, no. The medical examiner's office actually called. They called her brother. Her brother and her father had the same name, first name, Weldon, and he didn't do anything about it. They asked for dental records, and he didn't provide them, and he told no one. He was meant to be on that trip with his brother, and he wasn't on the trip, and he was consumed with guilt for the rest of his life. It was his little brother. So, so it was never confirmed that it was his. It was interesting to me that they only had two people. I mean, at that time, there must only have been 2 missing people who were thought to have come to a violent end in this area at that time. That was pretty amazing. But so we're hopeful that it is John, but we don't know. And they could not find the intact skull anymore. They just found a fraction of bone, fragment of bone. So.
How did the survivors drop?
A great question. We had a couple of boat captains who had gone out and had managed to come in. When they got in, they heard that the Pelican had capsized. It was discovered by the lighthouse keeper who was watching the storm. He saw it and he called it into the Coast Guard. Now, here's the Coast Guard part that we don't tell in this, but we will tell in the full story, in the full movie. Coast Guard had one rescue boat, and it was out trying to rescue some people who got stuck out in another part of about 8 miles away from the lighthouse. And the guy was out there looking and looking and looking. The people who had been in distress got back safely and didn't notify the Coast Guard. And so by the time he got back and got up over to the lighthouse, it was too late. They called in for this large boat to come in. They were confused because they'd come in from Block Island and they didn't know if they were supposed to take orders from Long Island or Rhode Island. It was really complicated for a while. But in the interim, Paul Forsberg's father, Carl Forsberg, and a guy named Frank Mundus, who went on to become a very famous shark fisherman. Daughter lives here in Greenport. They went out on their boats, and this guy Lester Behan was coming back in. He went over, and they just tried to save Carl Forsberg and Frank Mundus were too late to get any survivors, but they were the ones who were towing the boat in. And then, unfortunately, by mistake, the Coast Guard cut the line, and they had to, so it was kind of a nightmare. But Lester Behan took in, I don't know how many. He was so desperate to get people on the boat that he was using a gaffer's hook to. And then there was this couple, and their name escapes me for the moment, but you saw a flash of them on the screen, the heroic couple. They were on a sailboat. They were coming in, and I think they saved 8 people. The problem was when the Pelican went over, people were clinging to the hull, but every time it was rough, and so every time there was a wave, it would go down and come back up again. And again, most people couldn't swim. There were plenty of life jackets. They didn't want to put them on. And when it got rough, and one person, the one you saw the picture of the survivor, he went and put it on, and he was mocked by people saying, "Oh, it's bad luck," or "What are you afraid?" And it's just a little storm. And so he survived, and 45 others died. So you had a question.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
It is interesting shipwrecks survive, live on, much more than train wrecks, car wrecks, plane wrecks. And quite frankly, as all of us in this room are of European ancestors, we're here because a boat didn't sink.
Right. Good point. Good point. Good point.
Here, boat didn't sink.
Really good question. And then I want to say something about the Coast Guard regulations as well, because that's an important one in connection with boats not sinking. The Pelican was towed to Greenport. There was a shipyard there. There was no shipyard anywhere on the South Fork. And there were 2 stories. The story that we had heard was that it sat there sort of rotting, falling apart, until they set fire to it. The Greenport Fire Department set fire to it in a training exercise. The other story was told to us by a guy named John Costello. Somebody of you may know him. He says, "I threw it away." He said it fell apart. I was cleaning up the shipyard, it was falling apart. The only thing you could see was like the P in the name. There was everything had been stripped off it. I took it, I hauled it off, and I dropped it at the dump. You know which one is accurate. It's been hard to prove either one. But... Oh, George. Yeah, hello.
Me, reacted with the name Joe.
John Costello, yeah. Yeah, you guys know him? Yes. He's quite a character. He's quite a character. Wait, was it? Yeah. Yeah.
The Jen- Well, was an horrible condition, drinking lounge for young kids, and that's when I'm supposed they had it as a training, and they put the fire out at remnants, and it's theirs.
Okay, he didn't mention any burn marks on them. Before. It was before. It was before. Is that a siren? The one thing that I wanted to say about the Coast Guard regulations is that we heard from a lot of captains in Montauk that the one good thing that came out of the Pelican were these improved regulations. And then we were really lucky because the Coast Guard, the group that checks up on fishing boats, has started coming back to Montauk in the spring before the boats got back in the water. We were able to interview one of the Coast Guardsmen who's involved in that. They have really stringent rules now on those boats. It's phenomenal. I mean, you almost, if you want to have a fishing boat that's going to take people out, you almost have to buy one that exists or build one along with the Coast Guard watching over your shoulder. They're really stringent and really sensible in terms of the weight, the number of passengers, particularly that's restricted, and lifeboats and anything that's flammable on board. And it's impressive, and it has become a very safe industry in that way.
They get so surprised in the open waters like that they couldn't avoid the storm or
So that's a really good question. The storm. So Eddie, unlike some of the other captains, Montauk Point. So people were going on both sides of the point, depending on where they were lucky. Eddie liked the Frisbee bank, and when they got there, shortly after they got there, the weather started looking not so great. The weather report that morning, the forecast was for winds out of the southwest. I think they ended up being out of the northeast. So, so it started getting rough, and he wanted to go in, and he said, I think we're going to have to go in. It's, storm's coming. Oh, come on, Captain Eddie. Please, come on. We just got started. We're catching fish. And he delayed it. And so that was the first thing. And then as he turned the boat around, he was in what we call the rip, which is between it's a very, very tricky place to be. And one of his engines gave out. He had just had them serviced. It wasn't like he was not, again, he wasn't negligent. He was taking care of his boat. That was his one thing that he owned. But the engine gave out. He kept trying, and he was being slammed by the waves. He was in the rip. The tide was just difficult. And then of course, with all of those people on that port side, when it was hitting the starboard side, it was inevitable. We spoke to one survivor who is 94 years old. He was 20, something like that at the time, Seymour Gavin. And he said, we thought it was fun. We were all like, the boat was over, we were going, what? It was like a ride. And he said it was fun until it wasn't fun anymore. And of course, weather forecasts were very primitive at that time. George Goebel had a friend his friends who were pilots, and sometimes if they saw a storm when they were flying in from Europe, they would report it to him, so he would have a little bit more information. But at the time that everybody went out that morning, there was nothing. Nobody knew anything. Yeah.
During my morning, flight from the Bristol Island and the before Hurricane Carol, the Navy knew nothing about the storm coming up.
It's a good, and now we look at this, we have these storm watches and it goes on, and you forget that's 54 for me. That's not that long ago, and so 1951, obviously. Yeah. So.
And they still
All the time.
Hey.
We were trying to figure out the best time to go to the memorial with Noreen, because they were here. It was raining, on Monday and Tuesday. It's like, what do we go today? And we kept seeing this. Oh, look, it's not going to rain between 4 and 6. And it's it's a storm. Yes.
Is there any record of how many ships have been lost?
I probably.
Because I remember I bought a boat on City Island, and we were warned before we left City Island, do not try and sail through the gut. Go around the island, and come in that way.
Yeah.
And I remember on another trip once, we were coming across from New London on the ferry, and the ferry wouldn't go through Bucknut.
Yeah.
Went around the island.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's also tidal though too. Particularly, I think I want to say it's at low tide, right? I think there's a particular time when the tides are changing when it's really, really, really bad. This, the Pelican capsized 1 mile off the lighthouse.
1 mile?
Yeah. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much. Thanks for coming. And would you like to share? Hang on. Would you like to share your stories? Because both of you, yes? No? Yes?
Do you have an email address?
I do. I'll give you my card. Please.
So my father is from Southold. He's one of 4 mariners. They wrote a book about his life that nothing bad ever happened. His name is Jim Miller. He's also the founder of Miller Environment. So in his story and what we were always, his name is peppered throughout the novel. He was a 16-year-old boy, and he was one of the fishing boats. The gruesomeness of the bodies and the volume, he was tasked, the boat was out, and as you said, the Coast Guard were not the ones that brought it in.
Right.
It was actually another fishing boat. As soon as it capsized, they went there and they were saving boats as fast as they could. And then when the Coast Guard did bring it alongside, my dad was tasked, because of his age, bring up any survivors or bodies that were down there.
I should say they were really hoping. I mean, as Paul made reference to, they were really hoping that there was an air pocket and that there would be survivors in the cabin, because there were quite a few people in the cabin.
Appreciate that you were talking about how it affects people. Most like
Yes.
water.
Yes.
That this story was told my whole life by my father, and eventually made his memoir, which can get simple. And he tells the story of being such a scrawny little 16-year-old, and every time wastewater and going down and bringing it up, and the difficulties that rigor mortis had already set in, and there was no way, and how he had to navigate bringing them up, and then dockside would have been state troopers and the Coast Guard to help him keep these unfortunate souls. And in his book, he talks about, humanity, how you could look around and thank God for the sailing club that saved so many people by bringing blankets down because hypothermia. Everybody didn't know what to do, but they did something. And here he is tasked with doing this. And the other side of humanity is, of course, in his book, he describes how there was this newspaper photographer that all he wanted to get was some really gruesome picture. And my dad was basically in shock, bringing up these bodies. And he's shaking his head. And he's like, go away, go away. And I was like, no, pose with the body. And with that, there was a gentleman on the dock, as he calls this incredible figure, he called his hero. And basically what they did is they got the photographer, broke his camera, and beat the hell out of him. That to this day, when he recounts the story, he calls him his hero because he was just a kid. Now, that being said, nothing bad ever happens is kind of my family's legacy, how you can make anything bad turn into good. And the indelible mark of this story went to the 50th anniversary, where he was in his office and his friends just popped in from Riverhead and he sees the 50th anniversary edition of Newsday. He says, why do you have that? He says, I see the scrawny kid there on the cover. That's me. His friend looks at him and goes, you were there too? He says, oh, yeah. He says, I was the boat that saw them actually capsize, and I'm responsible for bringing in some of them alive. And then my dad recounts his story. And his secretary's going in and out. If you know my dad, it was always just a phone beat of activity. And finally, she comes in and she says, oh yeah, it's my dad on the cover. My dad looks at his secretary and says, who's your dad? The state trooper. So that state trooper, my dad later met up in life. That gentleman who my dad calls a hero had no recollection of beating up the cameraman. And he says, it was just part of my job back then to do these things. And the telling of the story is you just never know how someone can profoundly change your life. And yet it was just an everyday occurrence in his life. So thank you for doing this because it has affected so many people profoundly and a conduit for people to talk about it. So thank you for
Thank you. I have to say, people have really very much wanted to talk. For the most part, people have wanted to talk because usually they haven't shared it beyond their family. And one of the things that's been really cathartic has been getting them together with one another, and really letting their guards down. And at the memorial dedication last year, Zach Beja, who's this lovely man, his father, he's the one who was 11. And he said, I don't know all of you, but we have a bond. And it was true. It's a painful bond. But anyway, thank you so much for sharing that. I will just mention that your stepfather was Angela Testis Sr. Excuse me, Angela Testis Jr. Angela Testis Sr. died. And I believe he was friends with Nicholas Trotta, who also died on the Pelican. And I think that Joe Trotta was later in touch with your stepfather.
My stepdad just talking about it, even growing up. We knew very little. Then his dad out of the water and he just felt so guilty. He survived and he's dead.
Yeah. It's such a sad story. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Saturday, May 17th at Mitchell Park in Freeport, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary is having a boating safety day, all kinds of demonstrations and talks and
Great.
Obviously important. Yes.
Don't ever get on a boat if you've been drinking
Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you very much, Mia. We have snacks and books if anybody is interested in picking up one. This is the last of our Lighthouse lectures for the season. It's been wonderful. Thank you to the volunteers who made this possible. We are going to have another lecture. You're going to have to wait until July, and a little bit of a change of tone. We're going to be talking about quilting.
Great.
So a little bit of a lighter tone, but thank you for today. This is a very worthwhile story, and I'm glad that we're able to remember it and share it. So let's have some tea, some cookies, and thank you all.
Thank you.
it.